Well, after I got out of the service, I met some friends who directed me into the medical field. I took pre-med at Memphis State and ended up as a pharmacist from the University of Tennessee, which was right there in Memphis. While I was going to college, I met a friend of mine who had just joined Park Avenue Lodge number 362. And I asked him, I said, how do you become a Mason? And the next thing I knew, I had two people on my front porch asking me if they could come in and talk to me. So I joined Park Avenue 362 in 1948, and I've been a Mason ever since then. I took catechism there. Tennessee catechism is very similar to Florida catechism. I taught catechism there for a couple of years, and I told you I was in the active reserves, and I had a commander who was taking his entered apprentice degrees at the same lodge, and during the day he would say, John, can you come in and we'll talk catechism? I said, yeah, okay. So I would go over to his office, and the secretary said, just a minute, I'll tell Colonel, and he'll let you in. I said, okay. And he came out, give me the glad hand, smiles, and the secretary was sitting there looking at us. And after I came back out, I was all smiles. We shook hands again, and I said goodbye. And he went back into his office, and the secretary says, Captain, I want to ask you a question. I said, what's that? He says, well, when other people come in to see the colonel, they usually have a frown on their face, and they look like they're going to be in trouble. And when they come out, I was assured that they were in trouble. But when you come in, you had all smiles on your face. The colonel gave you the glad hand. He says, just what do you do when you're in that office? And I said, well, we're members of the same fraternity, and I'm the instructor. Oh, she says, okay, I understand. So from then on, I had no problem getting together with the colonel and teaching him catechism.
That's excellent. Did you ever notice any other soldiers inquiring as to your relationship with the colonel?
No.
No? Okay.
No. Usually it was during the day, and everybody else was doing whatever they had to do. And reserve outfits are relatively calm. There's no rush to do anything. I've served at the officer of the day, operations officer, and of course flew as navigator. We were dropping troops out of Nashville and just north of the Nashville, Tennessee border at a troop carrier training, or troop parachute training outfit. And anyway, I graduated from the University of Tennessee in 1950, and I was assigned, called up and sent back to Nashville, Tennessee, of all places, and was sent to Japan. I spent a year, 2.5 years in Japan. Served there as operations, served as navigator, and we carried troops in and dead bodies out. It was quite a deal. I got 2 combat missions in that organization, and this was dropping troops north of the DMZ in Korea. And I came back and was sent to a base in South Carolina, in Charleston, and served there for a couple of years as a navigator, and I was teaching navigation as well. We were experimenting with a new form of navigation where you get the maximum effects of the wind currents, and it was very, very interesting.
And during that travel, did you get a chance to visit lodges or remain active in masonry, or was it mostly?
Not really.
Okay.
Not really. During that particular time, I was assigned to headquarters, the European command in Germany, and I did have an opportunity there to visit a Yorkite chapter and see some of their masonry. It's very similar to ours. The next time that I had an opportunity to join in with Masons outside of Tennessee was at Westover Air Force Base in Massachusetts. And there I joined a military organization of Masons. We had an opportunity to visit some of the lodges. Their lodge meetings are a little different. They primarily around the dinner table. Mm-hmm. They have a nice big dining hall, and the lodge room is relatively small in compared to the dining hall. And they have a big cabinet on the side, and every man has his own setting for dinners, and they have a good time.
They were not dry meetings, were they?
Beg pardon?
Would they have alcoholic beverages or no?
I don't think they drank any
Okay.
alcoholic beverages, but they did have coffee and tea and stuff like that. I'm not real sure about the beverages, whether they had open bar or not. But the Yorkite was what I was primarily interested in. And
you were a member by that time?
a member of the chapter.
Okay.
When I joined the lodge in Memphis, I joined the chapter. That's all they had. They didn't have the council or the commandery. So we had a great time. And to go on, I was sent to Orlando, Florida with the B-52s when they came down here to replace the B-47s. And while I was here, I got in with a bunch of Masons, and we went to the various lodges. I went to Orlando 69. I went to Eola 207. Composite was a young lodge, and I think they were meeting in the same building as 207 for a while.
Mm-hmm. They were.
That's 205 East Central, which was a nice Masonic temple. The problem with 205 East Central was the parking. We had a brother who owned the property across the street from the lodge. And he says, as long as I own that property, you'll have parking spaces there. Well, unfortunately, he sold the property to a bank, and they built a bank on the property, and we lost the parking privileges, and that's why 69 and 207 had to move out of 205 East Central. It's a beautiful lodge, has a nice upstairs. It was a 3-story building.
Oh, wow.
And
Were all 3 stories part of the lodge, or was the bottom floor commercial?
the bottom floor was the dining hall.
Okay.
The second floor was the lodge room, and the third floor was a balcony in the lodge room with seats, and it was also, we had a stair with 3, 5, and 7,
Nice.
for the degree, and there was an inner and an outer door upstairs on that balcony. That was really nice. It really served the purposes. The floor of that lodge had a section of it that could be turned into a river. And in some of our degrees in the York Rite, we cross a river that is the boundary line between the country of the Jewish people and the next country over. And when they were rebuilding the second temple, a man named Zerubbabel, who was a captive of Nebuchadnezzar, he befriended Darius, the son of Histaspes, who was a royal of a royal family of Persia, and was a neighboring country to the, I can't even think of it. I'm having a senior moment. Anyway, he befriended, and as children, they played together. And when the Jewish people were freed, he went to Israel to rebuild the second temple. And this ran into difficulties. First, of money. Secondly, they ran out of materials. And they sent Zerubbabel to Darius, who had taken over Persia, and to see if he could be persuaded to assist them in their funds and materials, and with labor. And of course, Darius, being a real close friend of Zerubbabel, they had a good relation, and Darius promised to send all of the holy vessels back to Israel for the temple, and also to give them money and a lot of skilled labor. And that's how the second temple was completed, by Zerubbabel, Haggai, and Joshua. So that was not the end of it. The end of it was when the second temple was razed, and that was, all that was left was what we call now the Wailing Wall. And it's one of those things. Well,
I was going to say,
I-
I haven't had the privilege yet of petitioning the York bodies.
yeah.
So,
I gave a talk on the York Rite. I don't know whether you were in the lodge
I
or
was
not.
not.
I gave a talk on the York Rite and explained how the York and the Scottish Rites were the building blocks in between the entered apprentice, fellow craft, and the master's degrees. There's a lot of space in there that is not covered in the 3 degrees. And so the rites kind of fill in the gaps.
That's good. Now, I wanted to ask you, when the lodge was going through this transition of now not being able to meet in the 205 property, did they start looking for merging with other lodges like we see today, or was there a necessity to then build a place in order to move into?
No, we sold our portion of see, it was the temple at 205 East Central was owned by Orlando 69 and the York Rite. And the York Rite sold their portion of the property. Oh, by the way, York Rite, Eola 207 and 69, the 3 people that owned that lodge up there. The York Rite sold their portion of it, and I think we bought some property on Gore Avenue. And we met for a while in the various lodges. We met in Pine Castle, we met in Mocana, we met in the Scottish Rite Temple. And this kind of covered the years that the York Rite was out of socket, really, until they moved into Eola 207.
Why? Because that gave them a permanent place?
Yeah, Eola Lodge bought this property, and a fellow by the name of Rory Breward and I used to keep it, cut the grass and keep the weeds down. And Roy would sit on the spot out here, where it's now represented by the front porch of this lodge, and in a kind of a rocking chair we brought along so he'd be comfortable. He was a man of about 85 or so, so he was up in years. And I had the old riding lawnmower is still out in the garage here that we used to cut the grass.
Oh, wow.
And the back of the east here used to be a lake. It was filled in by water coming from this section of the town. And it still had that soft, spongy-like bottom, but the top was, you could drive a mower across it and keep the grass cut. And there was a nice little hill where the house is over here. And we owned the property all the way back. So we had all of this property to keep up and all the place that the Eola has now for parking lot and back.
That's a big property.
The only access was a phone company. They had lines running, and the power company had lines running up the south side of the property.
How long was the property not developed?
I think it was about 2 years.
Okay.
And 2, maybe 3 years after we purchased it. And in when I joined the lodge was 19 80, no, 70, 1970. And
Yeah, I have here
in
my notes.
1973, the lodge was completed. And Paul Miller was our first master of that lodge, of this lodge, in this temple.
Okay.
And Paul, I believe, is
I see it
he's
right
the
there.
third man on the wall. He's still alive,
Oh, yeah.
and one of the few of us that are alive. When I joined the lodge, Worshipful Spell was the master, and he was a good man, but he was up in his years and developed Alzheimer's. Back then, they called it dementia. It didn't have the connotation that we call it now. I went to examine a person with him, and we started out with a standard examination, and Worshipful Brother Spell got into the opening and closing, the opening primarily of the 3 degrees. And he started at the end of the penance and went all the way up to the masters. But he had all the questions and the answers. And he was trying to tell this young man that was trying to pass his catechism, this is the way we do it, And the guy was, he was just amazed. But I said, Worshipful, I don't know about you, but I think that was a pretty thorough examination of that individual. He just laughed. His favorite trick was to close the lodge. He'd take off his hat and put it on the chair, pick up the gavel, walk by the altar, and as he passed the altar, he'd hit it one time and says, "The lodge is now closed." Walk out the door. That was it.
Huh.
I befriended the next guy in line. He was a great master, and he put me in line. The senior steward decided he didn't want to go through the line, and they put me in as senior steward. And the next one out was the junior deacon, and I moved into the junior deacon the same year.
Oh, wow.
And I was Paul Miller's senior deacon,
Okay.
and junior warden up with the rest of them. Junior warden, senior warden, and was master in 76.
Wow. What would you say was the biggest difference of the way that the lodge meeting happened
here in Memphis,
then? Happened back when Worshipful Miller was in the East and today?
Well, there's not much difference. The Florida way of doing things is pretty steady. Back then, we didn't have the little red book. Everything was word of mouth. And I got talking with one of the district deputies, and they would send the district deputy and the district instructor and a couple of masons to Jacksonville, where the only set of books was open, and they would study the catechism like it was written. Most Worshipful Fisher wrote the catechism and the Constitution, rules, and regulations for the Grand Lodge when it was formed, I think. This was way long before my time. Anyway, they, on their way back, they would be talking about what they had seen and learned, and by the time they got back, it was already back the way they had it before. And it was not as, it was just a little off.